Yes, I guess it is. Well, good morning. This is not one of the talks that have been vetted by the program committee, so this is my fault. Whatever you like or not like about it, it's my fault. Don't blame them. So I'm going to talk about the IANA. I was asked to talk about the transition, but I decided that not everybody in the room is going to know how this thing started, what its heritage was, where it's going, and things like that. So I thought I'd start back at the beginning. And just a note on the slide, I am retiring from Harvard. My last day is the last day of this month, and I've been on vacation since July 1st, so it won't be that much of a change. But as of November 1st, my Harvard email address may or may not work. We'll see whether they're going to continue it or not. So this whole thing started. What became the IANA started with a network working group. In 1968, this was an ad hoc group. Steve Crocker and a few other folks put together a group to talk about ways to progress standards, progress technology in the ARPANET, this is before the ARPANET was actually deployed. I was concerned with host software, strategy for using the network, and initial experiments with the network. If you looked at RFCs up until 2009, up in the left-hand corner, it said Network Working Group. Well, that was just a ghost. There was nothing real about it at that time. The Network Working Group itself disappeared within a few years. Then RFC started, 69, RFC 1, 69. John Postel was the RFC editor at the time. Then he started coordinating socket numbers, 1972. Was a coordinator of that, so that this was the old ARPANET, which wasn't TCP/IP, it was NCP. So he coordinated, made a list of. Coordination in that context was make a list and keep it. It wasn't direct the selection of them. It was just somebody got the next one in sequence. The IANA name showed up in 1988. It was a long time later that the IANA name itself showed up, with Joyce Reynolds listed as the IANA contract, and John being the primary contractor. It was more than sockets. In 77, we started getting IP, the Internet Protocol, and some parameters for that. The IP addresses. There was a bit of an issue there with IP addresses. You didn't want to use IP addresses because it was too easy to mess them up. So Paul Markopetris and others came up with a domain name system. And part of that was somebody had to keep track of what the name server addresses were for the roots, the root top-level domains, and John and the IANA did that. And hierarchies was that top-level domains. All the parts of what became the IANA were in place by 1984, even though the name wasn't there. John and Joyce at ISI, funded by the US government, DARPA contract. So it was the US government, this is the US government's hand on the till that was so controversial in the last few years. The contract started in 88, extended to 97, churning along, but this was the IANA. All it did was IP addresses, protocol parameters, and top-level domains. No one cared about this for a long time. This internet thing was a toy. Nobody in their right mind would use it. IBM wouldn't use it. IBM said, quote, "You cannot build a corporate network out of TCP/IP." That was in 1992. You literally could not. That was their motto. The IBM user group Share. At Share you have stickers you put on your badge to indicate what you're interested in. If you're interested in communications, it's Octopus because it goes everywhere. If you're interested in numerically intensive computing, it was a circle with a 42 in it. If you didn't know what it meant, you didn't get one. We chose a Bumblebee for the TCP/IP effort with admin Share because aerodynamic theoreticians had proven bumblebees couldn't fly. IBM had proven TCP/IP wouldn't fly. Bumblebees didn't give a shit. We didn't give a shit. But the powers that be did care, and they ignored us. That made the internet what it is today. It was the ignorance and ignoring by the powers that be. AT&T, Digital, they all had their own ways to do networking, and IP wasn't it. So they ignored us, so we weren't put on any kind of controls. The FCC didn't care. The national regulatory, international regulatory people didn't care. So the IANA kept turning along, and nobody cared about it, except, of course, the internet cared, but the powers that be didn't care. Did protocol parameters only for the IETF. In theory, it could do it from other places, but it was really only IETF. IP addresses and ASNs allocate blocks to the RIRs, at which point there were 3 at that time. DNS did the top-level domains, overseed the top-level domains. Well, oversee, who knows what that meant. And so this is RC 1591, the DNS system structure and delegation. This was the idea that this was a set of top-level domains. We have the generic ones, and we have the country codes. And it says here, it is extremely unlikely that any TLDs will be created. That was 1994. Well, then the world changed. The world changed. The proverbial excrement hit the fan. Money. The National Science Foundation enabled network solutions to start charging for DNS names. $100 for 2 years, of which some was supposed to go to a fund, which was later on ruled illegal. And it was about 100,000 names in 1995 in .com, which at $100 for two years was real money. And people were looking at it and say, this is fantastic. You could actually make millions of dollars this way. Cool stuff. But the only game in town was network solutions. So what do you do about that? Well, the IANA had 3 functions. But the only one anybody cared about now was DNS, because that's where the money was, that's where the trademark issues are, it's where all lawyers are, the politicians, everybody's attracted to that particular pot of honey. And they don't care about the other stuff. But it was all in one mess. It was all in one thing, and it was the IANA. John and others, looking at the money being made by VeriSign on .com, weren't happy. They thought this was a monopoly and we should be able to do something about that. John thought that it would be a good idea to add some new top-level domains in order to create competition. There was a proposal from the IAB and ISOC chairs, John Postel and Nick Trio, who was at that time from IBM, was a person on the advisory council of ISOC, to move the global top-level domain management under the ISOC. This is a little bit of hubris on the part of the ISOC, but hey, it was worth a try. NSF was figuring out that there was a firestorm going on here, and they sponsored a number of forums, including one at Harvard in 1995. Also in 95, the IETF held a DNS Evolve BOF. That was a combination of 2 things. One was a BOF that Mike Odell and I, as operational requirements area directors, are trying to put on to talk about whether new top-level domains made any sense, to think about that concept. And the other topic was the proposal from the ISOC to take over the domain name system. We didn't get much support either way. There was a lot of discussion, enough sort of general feeling that it was okay to do the ISOC proposal, to do something with it. But a rough consensus on top-level domains is that additional top-level domains weren't going to threaten anything technically. They weren't going to threaten the domain name system technically, because it could handle that. That's not a big deal. .com had a hell of a lot of domains. Moving up another level didn't make any difference as far as technology goes. But there was a general feeling that they wouldn't solve any particularly known problem. They might be competition, but only for new environments, only for new entrants. The existing, if you're IBM.com, you can't move to IBM.foo without doing a hell of a lot of work, because you can't unwind the web to point to a new domain name. So it was not going to be competition for existing domains. But that didn't make a whole lot of difference. There was this monopoly going on. They were making a lot of money, so we had to do something. Whether we needed to do anything or not, we had to do something. Evolving out of the ISOC proposal was the ad hoc committee, or International Ad Hoc Committee on Domain Names. This came out of a proposal that John and others authored, proposed to add a new committee to look at things. And in 1996, November 96, the ad hoc was formed by the Internet Society and the IANA and John. And this was representatives from IAB, NSF, WIPO, ITU, NTIA, and others. It was very important. This was representatives. The chairman of the Internet Society at the time, Larry Landweber, decided that what he wanted to have was buy-in from the NSF and from ITU and others like that. So he sent off a note saying, appoint a representative. And that meant that if they did that, then they would be buying in at some level. And they did. So they went off and they pondered for a while. And in February 97, they published a report and an MOU, which recommended 7 new top-level domains. Not 1 million, just 7. Recommended a registrar-registry model, which, by the way, John didn't like very much. He thought technically the registrar-registry model was not a good thing technically. Thought it wouldn't work. But there was a lot of support for this, a couple hundred signers of the MOU. And then more shit hitting the fan. Yes, this is being taped, sorry about that. John got sued. John got sued by Image Online Design over .web. This turned out to be a critical point. John got sued because Image Online Design claimed that he had promised them .web. And the IOC proposal was going to build a new .web, to present a new .web, and Image Online Design sued to get that domain name, the top-level domain. John later told me that this was the trigger event for him to double down to institutionalize the IANA, because he got very poor legal support out of ISI. He thought he was screwed by ISI. And so he really pushed very hard to get the IANA out from under the government contract at ISI. Also in 97, Eugene rerouted Internet website, i.e. the roots, to Alternic to prove that you could have an alternate route. He went to jail for that. That was not a good thing, but that was a big deal at the time. Aaron went into business around that same time as well. There was an indication that some of the feds were beginning to pay attention to this internet thing at that time. 97, they should have really been paying attention a lot because there was a lot of activity then. This is a paragraph out of the AARON Articles of Incorporation. The FCC required AARON to put this in. The FCC at the time was worrying about number portability and wanted number portability for IP addresses too. Not an easy thing to do technically. You can't do a database lookup for every packet, which is what you do for every phone call. But they insisted on putting in there. So they were paying attention. We had to do that. AARON had to be formed with government approval because this was still a government contract. And so AARON was spun off in 97. Then later in 97, July 1st, 97, Vice President Gore, probably Vice President Gore, doesn't officially say that, it says a presidential directive, but it really probably Al, put out a framework for global electronic commerce. Note it's focused on commerce. Private sector should lead, the government should avoid undue restrictions, things like that. Government should recognize, the governments, plural, should recognize the unique qualities of the internet. They're beginning to pay attention. This is something real now. It's not just a toy anymore, it's something real. More on the directive, put out a request for comments for registration and administration of internet domain names. Note this is internet domain names, but they include protocol parameters and IP addresses in there just because they did. The principles for this included The private sector should do it. This should not be a government operation. It should be the private sector. A lot of comments on that. Meanwhile, John, being urged on by the lawsuit, worked on a proposal for a institutionalized IANA, and that's the term he used, was institutionalizing the IANA. Consulted with people in the IATF, consulted with Ira Magaziner in the Department of Commerce, and by the end of '97, he had just a general idea of what he wanted. A really pretty well filled out plan. Came to a head sort of at a conference on re-engineering the internet in January, the end of January 1998. Ira Magaziner was there to foreshadow what the US government was planning, which turned out to be the green paper and then the white paper. So he was saying, form a private company to do this. During the question and answer session, after his talk, he was asked point blank, well, from one of the French folks there at the meeting, why not just give it to the ITU? It's right up the street. They know this stuff. That's their business. And Magaziner's answer was political and long, but it boiled down to governments can't move as fast as the internet. And therefore, it didn't make sense to do that. John couldn't make it to that meeting. Later on, I found out why, but at the time, didn't know. So I presented in his stead this a paper on a set of slides on institutionalizing the IANA functions to deliver a stable and accessible global internet for mission-critical business traffic and transactions. If you want to look at it, it's on my website. It presents John's original idea of what the institutionalized IANA should be. It's a very different image, very different details than what became ICANN. During that conference, the US government discovered that John had redirected the route. That was a little exciting. Ira Magaziner pulled me into a corner and yelled at me for a while because he saw me as a path to John. And he literally yelled at me, and then he quieted down when he saw Gordon Cook hanging around in the background trying to figure out what was going on. But the message was very clear. He felt that John was endangering an effort to privatize the IANA functions. And because he was seen as taking it over and usurping government responsibility, that wouldn't sit well on government, on the Hill and other places in the government. So the message got through, and John ended his experiment a few days later. Shortly thereafter, the government, particularly Magaziner and Department of Commerce, published the Green Paper. Green Paper was called Improvement of Technical Management of Internet Names and Addresses Proposed Rule. And this is basically it was informed by but wasn't a copy of the IOC proposal. And it was basically very informed by what John had in mind of what an IANA, an institutionalized IANA should look like. A private, not-for-profit corporation, a new corporation, to manage the coordinated functions. It was to be a private sector corporation. Private entity for the benefit of the internet as a whole. It's a theme that runs through all of the IANA's history. From the first point when John thought it needed to be institutionalized, whether John thought it should be a private organization, not subject to government control, so did the US government believe it should be a private organization, not subject to US government control. The Green Paper set up an authority of setting for this new organization, set policy for the allocation of number blocks, oversee the operation of root servers, oversee the determination of when to do new TLDs, and coordinate development of other technical protocol parameters. Well, the IANA actually never coordinated the development of them. That was the ITF. But this language has been in all along, that the IANA coordinates the protocol parameters. Bit of a burr under the saddle of the IATF, and we tried to get it out a few times. I think finally did succeed. But the people who were not DNS people were very nervous about this whole concept of an institutionalized IANA, where you had this massive collection of lawyers and bad attitude called a domain name system. And you had this little thin veneer of IP addresses and a little thin veneer of protocol parameters, and boy, that seemed like a really bad idea. So a bunch of us got together with John, I believe it was in Manila in February of '98. I think that's when it was. And we asked him, can we get out of this? Can the domain names people go off on their own and attract all the lawyers and leave us by ourselves? And John said, no. There's not enough mass, there's not enough stuff there for either the addresses or the protocol parameters to stand on their own. You need to be part of it. We didn't like that answer, but that's the answer John gave, and so that's what stuck. Tried again later. I, as the Internet Society Vice President of Standards, met at one point with some people from the Department of Commerce. We'd say, we'd like out. We don't like the Department of Commerce believing they can tell the IETF, which is a private organization, where it must get its protocol parameters registered. And they said, well, we can't not do it because it's a contract with ISI and we want to move that contract to the new entity. If we change that contract, even one word in the contract, we might have to rebid it. And then Telcordia could get it. And then the world would end. The internet would no longer be what it is. So note that in either of the cases, either the RIR is getting together with John or me talking to the Department of Commerce, or have any criticism or any complaint about the services we were getting out of the IANA. We were getting great services. It was really a question of controlling one's own fate. Finally, in June of '98, the white paper came out. This was the definitive statement from the government, from the US government, saying, this is what the future direction is going to be for this IANA thing. Created a statement of policy which said the various things. Same things they've been saying for a while, is it's setting the policy for a number of blocks. Of course, the IANA doesn't set the policy for anything but the root blocks. The rest of the policy is done in the individual RIRs at bottoms-up process. Oversee the process of root servers, oversee the operation of the root servers, coordinate the assignment of other technical parameters, new TLDs. And note that the new corporation will be funded by domain name registries and regional IP registries. No mention of the IETF. So protocol parameters didn't have to pay for their goods. We still wanted to be able to say where we were going to do it, but we didn't have to pay for it, which is a good deal. There's a bunch of self-appointed community reviewers of the white paper. The International Forum on the white paper, the Boston Working Group, and there were a few others. I went to one of the meetings of the International Forum on the white paper. It was pretty amazing. It was a meeting in Geneva, and it was clear that the people that were there were not interested in the IANA. They were interested in a governance structure for the internet, to worry about pornography, to worry about commerce, to worry about all of those things which they think they needed to have to control this internet thing. Governments were thinking the internet was running away from them. Commerce wasn't clear about how you could do commerce. What if somebody in France cheats and you're in the US? How can you deal with that? They were looking at that. They were looking for that. They were looking for the internet governance, not the IANA. And some of them were a little weird. There was one of them that got up and said, you know, all of this focus on country code domain names doesn't make any sense because the internet's going to do away with countries. So we should just ignore that. Well, that hasn't happened. So they were trying to fill what most of us thought was a well-needed vacuum. But they were trying to fill it, and that's a lot of what's going on with the transition, the IANA transition, was that the folks like Senator Ted Cruz from this state and the Attorney General of this state felt that letting go of the IANA was letting go of governance of the internet. And the IANA was never governance of the internet. It was simply some minor technical functions. John worked very assiduously to come up with a proposal to fill the request of the white paper. He submitted the proposal on 2nd of October, 98, and a few days later he died. 4 days after that, the Department of Commerce sent a letter to ISI saying that they would accept John's proposal with some tweaks. Shortly after that, ICANN, which was the new name for John's proposal, had its first board meeting. It was a closed board meeting. Unfortunately, that's what they came across. The message came across from ICANN was, this was us, and you are you. And it was very sad, because it was not what most of us out in the field wanted. We wanted an organization which did what John did with the openness that John had. And that's not what ICANN turned out to be. ICANN was incorporated and was signed an agreement with the Department of Commerce. And the agreement really didn't say much. It said, here's the functions of ICANN, IANA. It's the same ones that we talked about all along. Establishing the policy of number blocks, even though that's done at the RIR level. Oversight of the root servers, new top-level domains, and coordination of the assignment of protocol parameters. Same stuff. Department of Commerce said, on their side, this is what we'll do. We'll set up procedures that permit modifications or additions or deletions of the root zone file. That turned out to be the only thumb that the Department of Commerce had over ICANN, was any change for the root zone file had to be passed by the Department of Commerce. Other than that, they didn't do anything. They chided ICANN every now and then for being too closed or being too capricious, but they didn't actually say anything about the number policies or the protocol parameter policies. That wasn't what they're in there for. It was simply this one function of, no, you can't change Cuba's IP address for their top-level domain server without US government approval. That was seen as a controlling point. In reality, it wasn't much, but that was it. That was later replaced by an affirmation of commitments, which is say, we're going to be good guys, not a big deal. Said pay attention to governments, but don't give them too much power. Some facts about ICANN. John's ICANN is down at the lower left-hand corner. The budget for ICANN under John's concept was a few $1 million. ICANN's budget now is over $100 million. John wouldn't recognize that. It's a completely different concept of what John had in mind. Top-level domains. We had a sudden explosion of top-level domains. A lot of us think that that's complete nonsense. Certainly John would have thought it was complete nonsense to get 600 new top-level domains. What is it gaining? All it's doing is confusion. One of the things that came out of that IP evolve BOF was the belief that the more top-level domains there are, the more valuable .com is. Because that's the only thing people are going to remember when you have 5,000 domains, is .com and .net and .org. So it increases the value of the existing domains to get more domains. But ICANN decided, we can do this and we're going to do it. And here's the bylaws. It went from 7,000 words to 36,000 words in the bylaws. Any organization with 36,000 words in its bylaws, there's something inherently wrong with that. Not that I have read them all. I would doubt very much that any ICANN board member has ever read the entire bylaws. But they're all beholden to them. I'm ignoring a lot of stuff. Learning WSIS, where the ITU wanted to get itself anointed as the ICANN replacement. ITU proposals, ITU-T proposals doing the same thing. The Internet Governance Forum, etc. And I'm generally ignoring the fact that ICANN basically pooped in its own nest and blew a huge amount of community goodwill at the beginning, going very secret, very capricious, changing its bylaws overnight, literally. But despite all of that, ICANN and its IANA functions has been seen by the ISTAR community, which is the general, it's W3C and the IATF and the IAB and the RIRs, et cetera, as the best game in town. It is still not directly under a set of governments. A set of governments running this function is not what you want if you want an internet which is not simply another telephone company. You want an internet which is the internet. You don't want it to be a government-run organization. So the general view is it's better than any alternative that we've seen. And so repeatedly, the RIRs and the IETF and the W3C have always supported continuing the IANA function and continuing it in the general area under ICANN. And it's today's date, that's the way it works. The world changed. We've got real changes in the internet environment, the political environment as much as anything. In 2001, Brazil and India, South Africa came up with a new proposal to move the governance to the UN. Boy, that would have been good. But that didn't go anywhere. And then June of 2013, Edward Snowden showed up and said, hey, the US isn't the good guys that they pretend to be. And this was pretty important because many of the proposals in WSIS and the ITU had been stopped by the US saying, we're the benevolent dictator. We're good guys. We're a dictator, but we're good guys. We control this internet thing for everybody's benefit. And Snowden comes up and says, well, maybe not. And that made the politicians' job to try and stop some of these movements much, much harder. And I suspect directly led to the decision on the Department of Commerce to actually finally blow the bolts. Because they couldn't continue to see how they could continue to protect the internet from the ITU and the UN and the traditional standards, the traditional regulatory world. The ISTAR put out a Montevideo statement on future internet cooperation, which said, let's actually move on to what these proposals have been saying, the Department of Commerce have been saying forever, which is that it's a private company and it should be done outside of government control. There was a Net Mundial initiative, which was not part of the ISTAR. This was something where the chairman of ICANN decided that the future is a new organization, a new thingy that is going to manage the world. And we're going to be there forever, and perpetual seats and all kinds of stuff. And this was, let's say, mixed reviews. The ISOC board said, no, we're not going to be part of it. And some other parties liked it. But in general, it sort of faded away. Then, let's say it's the beginning of the end of the beginning. The beginning of the internet was the time, well, it's under some level of US government authority. Well, we got the beginning of the end of that when the NTIA announced in 2014 that they were going to potentially move away from their minimum control that they had over the editing of the root zone file, move away from that as an independent organization as it had been envisioned for all of these years. And they asked for a transition plan, not multiple transition plans. They wanted a transition plan. Plan had to meet certain characteristics, support the enhanced multi-stakeholder model, meaning that it couldn't be a government-run thing, maintain security and stability and all of that, meet the needs of the IANA customers, and maintain the openness of the internet. I'm not quite sure how you could do the last one based on what the IANA functions are, but it was there because it sounded good. The proposal said you must have these parties participating in the solution and the proposal, the IETF, the IAB, and the Internet Society, so the IETF gets 3 votes. It's a nice concept. The regional registries, domain name operators, VeriSign, and other interested global stakeholders. Wanted one proposal, and that proposal could not be one that replaced the NTIA's control, NTIA's thumb with a government agency. It had to be more open than that. The various parties got together. They got 3 subgroups trying to come up with different parts of the proposal. IP addresses folks, the IETF, and domain names people got together and came up with their pieces of the proposal, and then these were all merged together. But there was a big question. In theory, the Department of Commerce had some level of control to hold IANA, particularly ICANN, accountable. If ICANN stopped following its bylaws or changed them into something where governments run it, the Department of Commerce could have said, hey, wait a second, let's rethink that. So what do we do when even that minimum possible thing goes away? There was a lot of worry about that, and that was one of the things which held up this proposal for transitioning the IANA for a very long time. Huge effort, huge community effort, and ICANN effort, because this proposal basically says the community can fire ICANN. It can fire the ICANN board, it can fire ICANN individual board members, it can trash ICANN. And strangely enough, the ICANN board didn't really leap to the opportunity. They thought that maybe was a little bit extreme, but in the end, everybody agreed on a process where the ICANN community can take action only after extensive community discussions and debates through a process of engagement and escalation. In other words, it just can't be capricious. And here the community powers are pretty amazing. They can reject the budgets, the ICANN budgets, IANA budgets, or particular operating plans, reject changes to the bylaws, approve bylaws, articles of incorporation, sale, etc., remove individual directors, remove the entire board, create a binding independent review process, reject board decisions relating to the reviews of IANA functions. In other words, the board gets a review of IANA functions and it says IANA is not doing a good job. The board can't now say we reject that input. And there's rights of inspection and investigation. It's a pretty serious control. This is no capricious little veneer like the Department of Commerce had. This is serious community control, community review over ICANN. So there was a bunch of steps in 2015, throughout 2015, that resulted finally in the end of March of 2016 with a formal combined transition proposal being sent to the NTIA. But there are people in Congress who thought that this was the US government giving the internet away and weren't really thrilled with that idea. Again, the senator from Texas and the attorney general from Texas and others just thought that this was giving the internet away and going to endanger the US citizens' First Amendment rights on the internet. Now, it's inconceivable how they got to that point, but that's what they got to. And they got to it probably because they were back in that picture back in the ad hoc days when they saw that ICANN was the governance of the internet rather than some technical functions. So 4 state attorney generals sued to block this transition. I'm told, John Curran just told me that they lost in court. They finally withdrew their suit on last Friday. So Congress tried to block it. Congress did block it for a while by putting in bills over the years to keep NTIA from spending any money or from completing any transition. Ted Cruz tried to get another rider put in this last go-around on the budget and failed, so that the congressional block on action and the IANA contract both ran out on September 30th. And so on September 30th they ran out, and on October 1st, bang, ICANN is independent. It's no longer under Department of Commerce. And they can't unwind that. The contract has expired. They can't reinstitute the contract, so it is reasonable that the attorney generals withdrew their suit, because even if they had succeeded on appeal, the contract's expired, and it would be hard to unroll that fact. So we have an independent IANA now. It's buried inside, deep inside, a massive organization called ICANN. In theory, this is what John planned for and what the Department of Commerce planned for all these years. an independent organization that is doing these technical functions, not a political function, but a series of technical functions. That's what Department of Commerce has said, and John has said they wanted since 1998. This is something John sent to a Congressional Oversight Committee on 7 October 1998, a few days before he died. This was his proposal to what became ICANN. Create a global consensus for nonprofit corporation with international board, transparent and fair procedures, and representation of all the various internet constituencies, from the technical people who created and nurtured the internet from its earliest days to the commercial interests who now see it as an important business tool, to individual users from around the globe. ICANN doesn't do much for individual users, and it certainly is massively larger than John ever imagined it could be. But it's still the best game in town. And it's what we have. Thank you.
All right, are there any questions for Scott? All right, center microphone.
Hi, Scott. Thanks very much. That was really wonderful. You mentioned early John had a technical issue with the registrar model. Could you explain a little bit about that?
He just thought it wouldn't work technically. I happened to be, I'd found out about the consensus of the ad hoc committee before, and I saw a board meeting that John and I were both in, and I went over to him and told him what the results were, and he said, oh, bad idea, technically a bad idea. And didn't really go into much more detail than that. He just thought that it was not something you would put together to technology to do it reasonably. But I don't know specifically what his objection was.
Hi, Eddie Winston at ISC. Scott, thanks a lot for this. Sort of a technical question. What you got yelled at about in London, could you explain the experiment of redirecting the route?
John sent email to the non-US TLD root server ops folks, asking that they point their zone update to his machine rather than to the VeriSign, the Network Solutions machine, I think Network Solutions, but the designated proper source. Didn't change any text in there, so it was exactly the same information. But it was pointing to a machine under John's personal control rather than the officially sanctioned one. And a number of the root server ops people did. And it took a couple days for that to be discovered. And when it was discovered, it was a big deal. It got in the press. As I say, Magaziner he actually literally threatened to send in the Marines, not the figurative Marines, but the literal Marines. Because John was a government contractor, and this was acting outside of his permit.
Would that have been the first example of swatting?
Yeah, yeah. All right, thanks.